Welcome back, everybody. No podcast style today. We got the 2024 NFL Draft quarterback overview. I'm going over the top 6 prospects. There are a few more prospects that I feel like are at least worth mentioning, but not necessarily very important, and I did not have a lot of time to go over them. So let's get right into it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let's get into J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy, I have as the 6th ranked prospect, quarterback prospect. He's 6'3", 202. Youngest prospect, of this top bunch here at 21.1. Where you'll see a little difference is my projection. I actually have him as a 3rd or 4th round talent. I don't see what he's done at the college level that is just significantly amazing and good to where he should be getting these first round projections. I think the actual projection, I think he could go to Minnesota. He's been very rumored to Minnesota at 11, which is crazy to me, especially because I think Penix is going to be there, and I'm high on Penix. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I have my actual projection. And like when we look at this, a year down the road, or maybe 2 years if he sits behind somebody, I would say I think a 3rd or a 4th would be worth it. Could he be a starter in the NFL? Absolutely. Could he also be a bust and be out in a few years? Absolutely. So I think he could go to the Vikings at 11. That's why I have the 11th overall. I also don't think he'll make it past the 2nd round, and I think it's unlikely he'll make it out of the 1st round because I feel like the Steelers pick at 20. If the other quarterback's in a situation where they get taken, I could see the Steelers going McCarthy. I don't think it would be the smartest option. You probably stick with Pickett or go for Russ or a free agent option. 40 time is a 4.6 40. There's been reports that he could run in the 4.4s. I am not confident that that's going to be the case. I definitely think that he'll run a 4.5. I think for somewhere in the 4.5s and even low 4.5s could be possible. But I don't think 4.6 is very accurate, and I don't think 4.4 is very accurate either. I'm fairly confident he'll be in the 4.5 range. We will see what happens. I had to put the time to throw on. I put it on for all the quarterbacks, especially being a Bears fan, seeing Justin Fields and his big problem with his time to throw. I found it was very important, the time to throw statistic. So I wanted to make sure I threw that in there. 2.84 is very average as far as NFL goes, and probably a little above average. Maybe I would say it's about average for the class too. This big great quarterback class that we have. Then looking at some of his stats, biggest negative is the low amount of attempts. Only 713 attempts is one of the lowest in the class. And, only 300 the past 2 years. There are any quarterbacks that have been in that range. 22 touchdowns each year is fine. 5 and 4 interceptions, that's good too. But if you look at 49 touchdowns and 11 interceptions in 3 years, is actually pretty bad in comparison to just one player's statistics last year. So we'll get to that. But again, I didn't see a lot for him. I think it makes sense that he's coming out in the draft because I don't think if he plays another year at Michigan that he's getting a first round draft pick grade. And that's why I feel that he should be valued at like 3rd or 4th round. And again, I could see the Vikings reaching for him at 11. There's even been talks of like them trading up. I don't understand it, but J.J. McCarthy, that's what I think of him so far. And then let's go over some of his strengths and weaknesses, put together that as well as a floor and a ceiling. We'll just go over the ceiling and the floor first because we get the pictures. I think play style kind of resembles Kirk Cousins. If you look at some of the strengths and weaknesses, I think the good deep ball that he has is nice. It just wasn't used super often with the run-heavy offense and having a great defense too. Of course, they won a national championship, but I'm not super impressed with J.J. McCarthy's team. That the national championship to me is his team stat, and I think he was fine. He kind of does end up sliding into more of that what do they call it? The game manager quarterback role that a lot of people are getting the tag of, and that's kind of why Alex Smith is in there. Had to put athletic Kirk Cousins. Oh, we got a funny picture of Kirk Cousins. Always got some funny faces going on, but I think Kirk Cousins is kind of that guy that was drafted in the 4th round, and it took some time for him to get somewhere in the league. Eventually found his spot. I just think J.J. McCarthy is a lot more athletic, so that would not be a fair comparison. So I threw Alex Smith in there as well. And I wanted to do a floor and a ceiling for each because if you look at some of the guys, they'll do a draft comp. And I would just rather have a range or like an idea of where they could be. I think the floor then is Jake Locker. For those of you that don't know who Jake Locker was, he was drafted to the Titans in the mid to early 2000s with the 8th overall pick in the draft. And he ended up only playing in the NFL for 4 seasons, and then he was out of the NFL. And never really put up any good stats, played well in college, just didn't convert to the NFL, and I definitely could see that happening with J.J. McCarthy. I think McCarthy would benefit from sitting his first year and even maybe 2 years in the event we got in the event that Kirk Cousins comes back to the Vikings. I actually think one of the best scenarios for J.J. McCarthy would be if he's got to go to the Vikings, you sit behind Kirk Cousins for 2 seasons and learn, because Kirk Cousins has been successful these past years, not as far as winning championships or playing well in the playoffs, but at least being a top quarterback as far as completion percentage and throwing touchdowns and not throwing a lot of interceptions. Kirk Cousins is able to do that well, and that's another reason I kind of threw him in there. But going over strengths and weaknesses, McCarthy's got a good pocket presence. He did perform well against some stronger rosters. Obviously, Michigan played against some tougher teams and was the quarterback for the team that won the national championship. I don't think you can discredit that, but I also think you could argue that he might need to go into a situation to play well or sit for a while to learn. Maybe even as long as, in a way Jordan Love did. He sat behind Rodgers for 3 years, turned out good. He was drafted, I believe it was late in the first round at that point with the Packers. And then the weaknesses. Very low experience. Again, one of the lowest amount of passes thrown in the draft, which has proved to not go well, specifically for a guy like Trey Lance. Mediocre overall accuracy. So I mentioned good deep ball accuracy. It's not necessarily that he can fit it into really tight windows, but it's usually fairly on the money, in stride for the receiver. And I think on a deep ball, usually the receiver will have more opportunities to adjust to it, to where overall there is a lot of times where I saw, watching McCarthy film, where the receiver has to adjust, and there was more they call them hospital balls, where the receiver might have to jump up high and in a risk of getting just mutilated by a defender in the event that the pass is high versus if they would have thrown the ball low and then the receiver can get down and not risk just getting absolutely blasted by a defender. Inconsistent touch on the ball. I noticed that too. There was sometimes McCarthy doesn't have a super strong arm by any means, especially compared to a lot of other guys in the draft. But I think as far as sometimes there was situations where he would laser it in and it probably should have had a little bit more touch on it, and as well as times when he lofted it where it should have had more velocity on it. So problem there too that I would see. And then last thing is poor footwork. Just looked kind of sloppy, almost a little lazy sometimes. I think he kind of had it easy. So I think that could be a problem moving forward, and that is J.J. McCarthy. Next, we have Bo Nix. Bo Nix, 6'1", 210. Age is 24. One of the older guys in the draft. By the way, all of my, for the 40 time, the age, the height, weight, that's all from Pro Football Reference, or I guess in this case it's College Football by Sports Reference, as well as NFL Draft Buzz was where I was getting a lot of my information for that, specifically the 40 times from NFL Draft Buzz. But my projection for Bo Nix is where he should be drafted is 2nd to 3rd round. I think the actual projection will be 2nd round. I think it's beneficial that he's had, especially for him this past year, that he's had all the experience. 2,000 attempts is huge. He's played 5 seasons. That is also why he's older at 24. You look at the yards and everything, and he does really have pretty great stats, especially the last 2 seasons. You factor in 72% completion percentage, and then this year was pretty phenomenal. And we were talking about J.J. McCarthy getting, 49 and 11 touchdowns and interceptions. just in 1 year, Bo Nix gets 45-3 with 77% completion percentage. Not against the greatest talent, but I think he might have increased his draft stock and I think, if I'm being honest, I think he could be first round. I'm just kind of making a bold prediction here, saying that because I haven't heard any talk about him, and I don't think there's anything that's going to happen in the combine that's going to make him shine above everybody else. He's 6'1", 210, which is pretty undersized, which oddly enough people don't talk about. Some people list him at 6'2", and he might be. I don't really understand that, especially like Caleb Williams is the big one this year that gets labeled as undersized. I don't really understand that, but we'll get to that. 40 time 4.75, which is slower of the quarterbacks we're going to talk about today, but if you would have said a 4.75 was slow like 10 years ago, you'd be crazy, because that probably would be one of the more faster 40 times. So still somewhat athletic, but kind of like in that regard, like I think of Aaron Rodgers as being a guy that's just like, you think of him as a pocket passer, but then when he actually gets out and run, you're like, oh, he's got a little speed, a little giddy up to him. So 4.75, decent 40, decent, moving. Still, I think he's a little undersized. Time to throw, 2.44, one of the fastest. That's like way above average as far as the NFL goes, or not maybe way above average as far as college football goes. Just lightly above average in the NFL. So I think that is also a really good thing for him coming out of the draft. And I think kind of a sneaky pick. That's why, like, when I do my projection at second to third round, like, ultimately, Bo Nix, I feel like, is the one guy that just could be that really sneaky, like, nobody's looking at him to be the top guy, but I think he could be something. But I don't want to read into it too much, just because I don't believe in him a whole lot. Bo Picks was the nickname last year. But we'll go through it here. Strengths, fast processing. We mentioned it, quick release. We mentioned that in the previous slide with the 2.44 time to throw being one of the fastest. He has the most experience. We talked about the amount of passing attempts that he has and the high amount of yards all through college, getting benefits from those COVID years. And then good at evading pressure, while the weaknesses, he kind of panics under pressure and will sometimes evade the pocket too early. And he can also be hesitant and miss opportunities. Kind of like, just I have to relate it to an NFL quarterback that I've watched a lot of film on, Justin Fields, where you tend to have to see the wide receiver open to get the ball out. So I do see that as a problem with Bo Nix, and I see it as even more of a problem because he has so much experience. We shouldn't see these problems. But at the same regard, he also has the tendency to force plays. So I think that's kind of a decision-making thing when going over both of those departments, is you need to be confident in the throw that you're going to make and not at the wrong time. So from what I saw, sometimes he would just try to rifle it in there, and it might not be a great decision. But he would also do the Justin Fields thing where he'd be very hesitant, not able to throw a receiver open, but more or less see the receiver open and get him the ball. Ceiling and floor, I did Brock Purdy and Jared Goff, because I don't think that Bo Nix is going to have to be a game manager, but that's what everybody was calling Brock Purdy, and he's not a game manager to me. A game manager is somebody that makes safe plays and tries to avoid making mistakes, in my opinion, to a point to where it could hurt the play. Whereas Brock Purdy had the highest average yards per attempt and the highest yards per completion in the NFL last year. So the guy that's throwing the ball farthest down the field is not going to be the guy, not necessarily a game manager. And then if we look at Bo Nix, he had a huge increase. I believe Brock Purdy's yards per attempt was 9.6 or 9.5 exactly. But if you look early on from Bo Nix, from Auburn Bo Nix, we see 6.7, 6.8, 7.1, not very good. That would be towards the bottom in the NFL. And then the next 2 years, he's closer to the top. So definitely some improvement there. I would have to stick with it again. Oldest prospect out of the draft that's in this top conversation. Brock Purdy's actually only a year older than him. And then there's guys that are younger than him, like C.J. Stroud, and probably other ones that I'm missing. But Jared Goff is the other one. I think with the tendency to force plays, I kind of threw Jared Goff in there too because I did see a little bit of that with Bo Nix, where as far as forcing plays, like there's a lot of times where Jared Goff will try to force the ball in somewhere he probably shouldn't, and he throws an interception. He did throw a decent amount of interceptions last year. And the good part about Jared Goff is he is not fazed by interceptions. So I think I saw a little bit of that. So I did put in the two quarterbacks in Jared Goff and Brock Purdy as the ceiling, and then the floor is Mac Jones. And you'll notice some of these names might not be the perfect name to represent the players, but there's so many different places that have the draft, the draft comp out there, and a lot of them just do a draft comp and they just do one or two players. And I wanted to try to pick some new names for all these that people hadn't heard before, just to get a different idea on it with how I saw these people. And then the floor is Mac Jones. I think Mac Jones could be out of the league pretty soon, but it's kind of a similar situation where Mac Jones had a great college career, and I don't know if Bo Nix is going to transfer to the NFL very well. Again, I said he could be the sleeper prospect that ends up being a great talent, but I, again, also think he could completely flop and it could be over, and that would be why, like, Mac Jones is probably a backup next year, and he might not be in the NFL after a few years. So I think Bo Nix could be the same, but that is what I think of him. Moving on to Michael Penix Jr., second oldest prospect in the list today, 23.9, super close age to Bo Nix, 6'2", 212. I project he's going somewhere between 6th and 20th. I haven't seen many people that think he could go to the Giants, but I think Michael Penix would be an upgrade from Daniel Jones. I'm pretty high on Michael Penix, and I think when you look at like his deficiencies, there's just not a whole lot of them. Everybody that talks about him, they say the biggest negative is the injuries and the amount of injuries that he's sustained and the amount of time that he's had in college. Will it transfer? To me, it will. And I like what I've seen. The 4.6 40 is still pretty impressive, especially factoring in the injuries that he's had and also the time to throw, second lowest on our list today at 2.68. He's able to get the ball out fast. He's able to bomb it down the field. I don't like seeing the 6 years in college personally. I don't like that at all. Just sure, he didn't have a lot of experience until Washington, and you see him just ball out. We're looking at the stats. We got 31 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 36 and 11, and then almost 5,000 yards in 15 games is pretty impressive. And then on pace, in an NFL season, on pace for 5,000 as well in the 13 games. So I saw a lot of good things out of Michael Penix, and we will talk about them in this next slide here. With his strengths and weaknesses, we'll do it again. We'll go over his ceiling and floor. I think Deshaun Watson, more of a prime Deshaun Watson as far as what I think of him. I think Deshaun Watson, when he came out, he was very good. Seemed almost like a veteran right out of the gate when he started. When he started, he was a great player very early on, and I think Penix could do the same. I don't think Penix is going to have any problems with a massage therapist, so he's not like Deshaun Watson in that regard. But I think his play style to me emulates Deshaun Watson. He's mobile in the pocket, precision throws, setting up wide receivers for easier catches and yak. We talked about earlier how J.J. McCarthy has some problems with throwing hospital balls and some slightly inaccurate where the receiver can still get it, but it might not be the best placement. So, and then Penix does the opposite where he can do that very well. Also the ability to read defenses pre-snap and make adjustments. He was doing a lot of that. That's an NFL skill. And I think you could argue that Michael Penix is the most NFL-ready prospect. It's also partially because he's had 6 years in college. Although if we go back and look, I don't believe he has the most throws. He's actually not. Yeah, so attempts, he's second behind behind Bo Nix still, because Bo Nix started most of the years he played, whereas Penix didn't really start until these last 2 years. Also, another thing to keep in mind is the completion percentage for Penix, pretty low, averaging 63 the whole time, and then 65 at Washington's a little better, but that is below average in today's NFL. So you have to keep that in mind. And then the biggest weakness is his injury history. We talked about it a little bit. He also has a below average throwing motion. And these two next things, like being left-handed, could cause a scheme change for a team. It's really just the way the plays are designed. And if you have, an offensive line that has a strength of going to one way, they'll have to adjust to go to another, with rollouts and play action and whatnot. And then the throwing motion also is unusual. I saw a video where a guy flipped the throwing motion to right-handed, and it looked faster. So I don't really understand how that works, but from everywhere that I read and from what I saw, it does look like a slow throwing motion. But if you look at the negatives, being left-handed isn't necessarily a negative, and the throwing motion could be debunked. And then injury history, you just hope that he doesn't get injured again. He really is a very complete prospect as far as what a quarterback needs to do. We talked about Deshaun Watson. Let's talk about Jacoby Brissett. I think the floor for Michael Penix is like a generational backup. Like, Ryan Fitzpatrick's type where he just goes around to every team. And actually, I've other than like J.J. McCarthy and even Bo Nix, honestly, I think Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy are probably the only two that I could see leaving the league very soon. Having that Jake Locker type career where they have like 4 years and then they're done. I think at the very least Michael Penix will be around unless he decides rather than being a backup he would want to play in the UFL or the Canadian Football League or something. But I think he'll be around. That's why I put Jacoby Brissett as the floor. Seemed right to me. Jacoby Brissett isn't the most mobile, kind of mobile. But let's move on to Jaden Daniels, 6'4". I've seen him listed at 6'3", too. I'm not sure what he is. 6'4", 6'3", that's fine. 210, very skinny. You can even see just in the picture. He's very slim. And also older. When I first saw Jaden Daniels and I didn't know his age a long time ago, I didn't realize, I wasn't really super familiar. I'm not super into college football. I do have favorite teams that I follow and I will watch games, but I don't follow it super closely. So I didn't even really know much about him at Arizona State. But his LSU performance, especially if you look at last year, 40 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 3,800 yards, got a lot of yards with his legs as well. Average yards per attempt is insane at 11.72. But my projection is third overall. The actual projection is third overall. I don't know if it's the Patriots. I don't know if there's going to be any trading situations, but to me it doesn't make sense for the Patriots to trade out of that and not take Jaden Daniels. I'm fairly high on Jaden Daniels to the point where I do think it's worth it for him to go third overall. I think as far as my projection, I think he is the one guy too that could potentially be a bust. I think he's a very boom or bust guy because I think he could be, if we look at it 10 years from now, there's a chance if something happens with Caleb Williams or Drake May that Jaden Daniels shines and is the top prospect. I also think he could, be out of the league. I think it would be longer than like a May longer than a McCarthy or a Bo Nix. But I do like what I see from Jaden Daniels. Current 40 time that we have is 4.5. I think there is a good chance he breaks into the 4.4s. And then time to throw is 2.91, which is a little lower and would be pretty far back in the NFL. But that is something that can be improved on. And again, 2.91 is not horrible in regards to what goes on in the NFL. And then moving on to the strengths and weaknesses, the ceiling and the floor. I have ceiling as prime Kaepernick. People might not like that, but the main reason I have Kaepernick is a lot of people with Kaepernick back in the draft, if you don't remember that, were saying that a big problem with him could be how skinny he is and his size, could render him getting hurt. But I also threw Lamar Jackson in there just because I think the skill set's the same, where I think Jaden Daniels is a really good passer while being a good, a good athletic running quarterback. Jaden Daniels does have those things that he needs to improve on, but I like where he's at. So strengths are quick and agile, great throw on the run, and he can throw the quick game or the deep ball. And then the last thing is he usually has smart decision making. We put in the negatives that he's not great past the first progression, but he at least doesn't have the problem where he's turning the ball over because he's not seeing. He usually is able to make good decisions. And then let's go to the weaknesses. He's below average on the footwork, does look very sloppy, maneuvering until, again, once he gets on the move and he's out of the pocket, he does look good. But as far as dropbacks, sometimes they're kind of sloppy, and it isn't a cut and dry, 3, 5, or 7 step drop, which, again, I don't think is the biggest problem, but as far as timing in the NFL, that can cause a problem. And then not great past the first progression. I'm seeing a lot of signs of, again, I talk about Justin Fields because he's been the Bears quarterback. That's how Fields has been. It's usually been first progression and then run around, try to keep your eyes downfield and throw it. And I have seen a little bit more out of Jaden Daniels that I think is closer to Lamar as far as keeping eyes downfield and being able to get the ball out. So I do like that. And then the last thing is just very slim for the height. People talk about Caleb Williams being undersized, but he's been marked at 6'1", almost 220. And then we have Jaden Daniels at 6'4", 210. We're not concerned about his size, though, so I definitely am. But we have ceiling is Prime Kaepernick. We talked about that, and Lamar. Floor is Tyler Huntley because, again, I think he's going to be able to be a backup. And this is not the Tyler Huntley that is, making a Pro Bowl. I can't guarantee you that Jaden Daniels is going to make a Pro Bowl. Maybe he would because the Pro Bowl has been such a joke. But I think he will be around the league moving forward, and that's why I put the Tyler Huntley comp on there as far as the floor. I don't think he's worse than a Tyler Huntley. I think he's a backup at the very least. Drake May, the most stereotypical quarterback looking prospect at 6'4", 230, 21 and a half years old. I'm projecting him to go second overall, and I think he will. I don't see there's any chance that he doesn't. I think it's been pretty clear that Caleb Williams is the one. Caleb and then Drake May is pretty clearly the 1B or 2. And then 40 time is 4.6. Time to throw is 2.78, which is good, and I do like that out of Drake May. And although he is also fairly low as far as attempts go, at only 952, he's done well in the situations he's had. So we have 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 24 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. I don't think you can say Drake May is a raw prospect, especially because we have seen him doing things at the line and making adjustments, pro-style things, which is very good for his age. And I've actually talked about, if you've watched my little podcast that I started with the Bears, the possibility of Drake May being a Bear if the Bears decided to trade back one spot, get a haul from the Commanders, and then take him. And I don't think that would be a horrible idea just because of all the good things that I've heard about him. So he has great arm strength, good athleticism, clearly a dual threat. Had to keep that in there. He had a bad offensive line, and I think that has to be put into the strengths because when you're a quarterback in college, you sometimes can get away with, and I guess Drake May did too, playing against not great opponents and maybe not the greatest defensive lines, and you kind of get bailed out of that issue. But the fact that that North Carolina didn't have a good offensive line will help, because if he goes to a team that has a good offensive line, it will help. Or if he goes to a team that doesn't, he's going to be able to understand that and potentially overcome it. So I think that's going to help. He's the most prototypical quarterback. We talked about that. And then supposedly interviews very well. I haven't seen these firsthand. They talked about it with Darius Butler on the Pat McAfee show. Has spent a whole day with him and I believe family golfing, and he just seems like a stand-up guy. He's a good person, and he interviews well. He's very smart from what I've heard. And then again, we talked about ability to make adjustments at the line is probably ahead of schedule in comparison to a lot of other younger quarterbacks, especially at just 21 years old. Weaknesses is he is slow in his progressions, can miss guys sometimes as far as miss open windows for receivers. Um, he didn't play the great opponents. I do have to look at that as a negative. It's not necessarily his fault, but I don't think you get to see his full potential and his talents. I don't think can be on full display, especially when you don't play against great opponents. And then he will force the ball into tight windows, and that's why I have Josh Allen. That's great. Meant to put Josh Allen. I think as far as the size, strength, and speed, he's very close to Josh Allen. As far as his will to just want to get yards and want to move the ball down the field, again, he'll throw interceptions trying to get the ball into a tight window. He'll barrel down the field and potentially try to run somebody over and make the play with his legs. But I also see Justin Herbert in the brains of it and being a smarter quarterback and making good decisions in that department. So that's where I have the ceiling is like some sort of combination of Josh Allen and Justin Herbert. And then the floor is Jason Campbell. If you don't know who Jason Campbell was, he was also kind of in that Ryan Fitzpatrick area where he played for like 8 different teams, and he was always a backup, and he always did something. Like Jason Campbell was on the Redskins, formerly Redskins, now the Commanders, the Browns, the Bears, the Bengals. I think he went to the Raiders. He was all over the place. And I think Drake May, I don't see him not, like, I feel pretty confident that he's going to be a starter in the league. I can honestly say that. But I think at the very least, he will be a backup and he will get slotted in places. But he'll get looked at as a bust if that's the case. But I still don't think there's a situation where he's not around the league. And that is my thoughts on Drake May. Finally, we have the one you've all been waiting for, Caleb Williams, 6'1", 218, 22 years old. Still younger prospect as far as what we've been talking about. A lot of older prospects with the COVID years going on. But I have him projected to go first overall. I don't see any reason that he doesn't go first overall. 40 time is a 4.59. He's not going to be running it, so we'll see what happens there. But I truthfully think that he could breach. I don't know if he breaches into the 4.4s, but I think he could get into the lower 4.5. Seeing him on the field, his running ability is very underrated, especially after seeing what he's been able to do. He honestly is very fast and very athletic for how much people talk about the arm talent. I think you can't discredit the athletic ability of him as well. And then I was able to find more statistics here for time to throw. So I wanted to put them all in here because he is suffering from the hold on to the ball too long syndrome more than anybody, with the total time to throw being 3.14 seconds. On throws past 5 yards, it's 3.21, which that doesn't really bother me. I feel like that number, honestly, all of his numbers could be inflated with how many times he would just scramble around and run around like crazy and then throw the ball, which is why Patrick Mahomes is kind of an anomaly in the NFL as far as guys with higher time to throw typically do not perform as well. Like if you look at the whole time to throw list, people towards the back are usually not as good quarterbacks, and a lot of the better quarterbacks have a quicker time to throw. Patrick Mahomes is an exception, as is Caleb Williams. And then time to throw on clean pocket throws where you have these designed quick passes. I wanted to include this too, mainly because, again, being a Bears fan, there's the Caleb Williams versus Justin Fields debate that goes on every day. And on, clean pocket throws, typically that factors in more of the quicker throws. And seeing 2.86 made me feel a little bit better because when you look at the comparisons and you go, wow, his time to throw is almost identical to Justin Fields, that's not good, especially with, for me, that being one of Justin Fields' biggest problems. But then you look at the clean pocket throws, and he is able to get the ball out. If you watch his film, there is still a lot of situations where he's able to get the ball out quick, on time, and throw with anticipation, which Justin Fields has not been able to do. But you look at the stats, 2022 being really the big season where he kind of blew up. 42 touchdowns, 5 interceptions is unbelievable. The passer rating overall at 169.3 is pretty unbelievable. 4,500 yards is great. getting 68.6, actually lower on the completion percentage. But he is good at throwing the ball away and making smarter decisions, so I don't knock that by any means. Let's move on to the ceiling and the floor. This is honestly more for humor than anything. We have Patrick Mahomes and Big Doug Flutie. Not saying Doug Flutie's big. Doug Flutie is actually the record holder for the shortest quarterback ever in the NFL, and that's why I kind of threw him in there, because he was also a quarterback that bounced around the NFL, and I think he had a stint with the CFL at one point, but he had a long career and still made decent money and left his mark on the NFL, and that's what I think the floor of Caleb Williams is. I don't see him being this bust that's out of the league in 4 or 5 years. I don't see Caleb Williams being in the league for anything less than like 10 years, if we're being completely honest. If he is a huge bust, if you look at a lot of busts that did perform really well in college, usually they do have some character concerns, which seems to be a problem for some people. It's not as much for me. We can talk about that. Ceiling is Patrick Mahomes. I don't want to discredit Patrick Mahomes at all, and it's unlikely that Caleb Williams reaches that point. For me, there just wasn't a guy that has the improvisational skills that Caleb Williams has in the NFL right now, other than Patrick Mahomes. And with that ability alone, I felt like the ceiling being Patrick Mahomes could be comparable. And if we're talking a floor and a ceiling, I don't like Patrick Mahomes as just a straight draft comp, but if we're going to mark it as his ceiling, what's the best he could be? He could be Patrick Mahomes, and I think it's fair to say that. Will he be? I don't think so, and it's probably not likely. But could he be? Yes, that would be the comp in that regard. Strengths and weaknesses. We have elite arm talent. Everybody knows that. Rare improvisational skills. We talked about it. He can make the quick pass or the deep ball. Sneaky athletic. I kind of talked about a lot of these already. And then also played with a bad offensive line. There's a lot of times where he had to break out of the pocket, or he did a really good job of staying in the pocket and maneuvering around the pocket like Tom Brady did, like Patrick Mahomes does. So I like seeing that, and I think that's another really big talent, whether it be being good on the move outside of the pocket or good in the pocket. I think he's good at both, and he's also good at maneuvering the pocket, which is where that rare improvisational skill comes in, is he knows when to stay in the pocket and often will make the right decision as far as staying in the pocket or leaving the pocket and extending the play. Weaknesses. Almost all snaps were from shotgun. I do see that being a problem. There are teams in the NFL that run like 95% shotgun offenses, so I don't see that being a huge issue, and the percentage of shotgun is significantly up, in the last 10, 15 years versus anything prior to that. So I don't really see that to be a huge issue, but in the NFL, they do take a decent amount of snaps under center, so you do need to be prepared for that, and I see why that could be a problem. As far as other biggest, I think the biggest is the long time to throw, and we talked about that. I think that is his biggest problem, and he will need to fix that, and he will need to also fix passing on short throws to make big plays. I think that is the one thing that if he isn't able to fix that habit that he's in right now, that could be a huge problem for him, because if he decides that he's going to pass on quick, easy throws that could help get you a first down or get you down the field to try to make a big play, that's not going to fly in the NFL. You can get away with that in college, but you can't get away with that in the NFL. So I think that is a significant thing to worry about. Let's talk about the last two. I put question marks next to them because I don't agree with them, but that's what everybody else says. Character concerns, I have no evidence of it. People have said he's not a good leader, and they don't want to see a guy that goes and cries on the sideline. They want to see a guy that's able to build up the team. I don't think that that's been a huge concern. I understand that you do need to be a good leader, but every report from other players on the team has been that he is a good leader and that he is a great human being, and they love having him in the locker room. And there's been no negatives from any players or coaches in the team. Now, of course, the players and coaches are going to back up their guy, but it's to the point where if it was seriously a problem, somebody would have said it. Even scouts that have been around it have said, wow, this is a good guy. It's the social media that sees him crying on the sideline or crying with his mom in the stands, painting his nails, and then getting blown out and stuff like that like to push that narrative. I don't believe it. I'm not concerned about it. Maybe in the slightest, I know with the Bears in their first pick, Ryan Poles did say a very important thing for him is what kind of guy are we bringing in? And a lot of Bears fans took that as, oh, we're keeping Justin Fields because Justin Fields is a really good guy. He's a really good human being. I've heard he's a good leader. I haven't really seen the effects of it. It seems like, if he makes a bad play, he just kind of sits on the sideline. He doesn't do anything to try to get fired up or, come back from it the next time. So, and then with other quarterbacks too, I think showing emotion to me is better than not showing emotion. So if Caleb Williams is going to show emotion on the football field, I'm perfectly fine with it because I would rather have somebody that shows emotion for the good situations and the bad situations rather than show no emotion at all. And then the undersized thing, I don't know if you paid attention to all the weights, but Caleb Williams is the second highest in the weight category for quarterbacks as far as all the ones that we talked about. A couple 210s, 202, I believe, was J.J. McCarthy. Obviously, Drake May was 230. But this whole undersized thing for Caleb Williams is ridiculous. If you look at the picture, I should have put it in the thing, but he's standing next to C.J. Stroud, who's listed at 6'3". And he looks like he's almost as tall as C.J. Stroud. He looks like he could be 6'2". There's a picture of him standing next to his center. His center is listed at 6'2". I forgot his name, but he's listed at 6'2", 298 or something. And Caleb Williams looks like he is perfectly even with height with this center. So I think there is actually a better chance. I would bet on it. I would bet money that there is a better chance Caleb Williams is 6'2" than 6 foot. And I think if we look, he might be like, per the combine, I don't know if he's going to get a height and weight at the combine. But I think the next time he measures, he will probably be 6'1" and 5/8", and he might be 220. I think with the undersized problems that people are talking about, I think it wouldn't be it wouldn't be the worst idea to put on a couple pounds just to show, hey, look, even if I'm 6'1", I'm 6'1", 220. You know who else is 6'1", 220? Jalen Hurts. He led the league in rushing touchdowns. So let's not talk about Caleb Williams being undersized anymore. It's not correct. But I do think Caleb Williams is the best in the draft. And I think this order that I put them is probably the best order. I think you could make an argument for Penix to be ahead of Jaden Daniels. I think Penix has a higher floor than Jaden Daniels, but Jaden Daniels has a higher ceiling. So we'll see what happens there. But let me know what you think, if you disagree or agree with all of my breakdowns of the quarterbacks. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and have a great day.